A very good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining IHR Australia's webinar series, Workplace Relations 101 for Frontline Managers. And in today's webinar, we will be covering managing performance the right way, from expectations to accountability. Welcome back. My name is Manasa Visakai. I am the marketing specialist here at IHR Australia, and I will be your host for today. But before we get into today's webinar, I would like to take a moment to introduce IHR Australia. At IHR Australia, we work with organizations across Australia to manage people risk, those challenges that can affect performance, culture, and compliance. We've been working with clients to support them for over 25 years, partnering with business leaders, HR teams, and boards to support both proactive planning and interventions to address issues. Let's take a look at our 4 core service areas. Let's start off with the HR consulting wing. This is where we develop people strategies and address workforce challenges. The next circle focuses on our compliance and risk advisory services, where our experts conduct risk assessments and ensure compliance with relevant laws and regulations. Our third wing is our workplace investigations and mediations wing. We help resolve conflicts and pave the way forward for our teams. And finally, our workplace training programs. We deliver training across the nation to equip teams for effective risk management. So, whether you're managing a current issue or strengthening existing practices in your workplace, our core expertise is about helping you manage people risk. Once again, thank you, everyone. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome our expert for today's session, Bronwyn Dennis, a senior facilitator and consultant based in Sydney. Hello, Bronwyn. How are you doing?
Hi, Manasa. Good today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. I'm Bronwyn Dennis. Some of you might have seen me before on webinars or even attended some training that I've done, as Manasa says, across Australia. I'm a senior facilitator and consultant at AHR Australia. I've been here for around about 2 years now. Prior to that, over my career, I've spent a lot of time supporting leadership teams to create more respectful, safe and effective workplace cultures. And that includes what we're here to talk about today, performance cultures. That's mainly been across government and non-government organisations. And I've worked with teams in a pretty big range of industries, including transport, education, health, disability, planning, government central agencies. So I have worked across a wide variety of areas. My focus, particularly in the latter half of my career, was very much on building leaders' capability to manage performance and to support high-performing teams, but in real and practical ways, not just theory. I have to say it can be really satisfying when you're working with a team and see them, meeting and exceeding expectations, objectives, and being able to adapt to, sometimes some really changing and challenging environments. At IHR Australia, I've worked with clients to look at how performance is managed across their business, trained both new and experienced frontline managers across a range of subject matters, but certainly across this issue of how we manage everyday performance. That role that frontline managers have is absolutely critical for organisations, and they need tools and approaches that are clear, realistic and effective. And of course, that's the focus of today's session.
Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction, Bronwyn. We've done these webinars before, and are you ready to get right into our topic today?
Absolutely ready, yes.
Wonderful. So as everyone here is aware, we are talking about managing performance. And my first question to you, Bronwyn, is, organizations often struggle with implementing appropriate performance management systems or just treat it as a tick and flick exercise. So what is your advice or recommendation around organizations can do to empower senior leaders to develop a genuine culture of performance?
Yeah, look, thanks, Manasa. Look, it's a pretty common challenge that I think many of us face within our organisations, potentially maybe faces as managers. And I think a word that you use there in that question is really critical. That it's not just a system issue; it's really a cultural one. If performance management within the organisation is framed as a process, if it's seen as something that's owned by HR rather than a core leadership responsibility and an intrinsic part of the culture, then it's really no surprise that it can become a compliance exercise, seen by people as something that's being, imposed on them that they have to do, rather than, a real driver of both results, performance results, and of staff engagement. And I think when we look at performance management, managing performance, we have to look at it as more than just that once a year activity, twice a year activity. And it starts with alignment, and that means making sure that you're able to clearly articulate your organizational goals and KPIs, making sure there's visibility of that across the business, and making sure your managers have the tools to be able to translate those, big goals, big picture visions into meaningful team objectives and individual plans. Managers should be working with staff to translate those team goals into individual goals, which of course should be SMART goals, specific, measurable, relevant, and time-bound, owned and regularly reviewed, not just mid-year, end-of-year check-ins. Goal setting, though, isn't enough. We also need to, throughout that process, empower and develop our people towards achieving goals. That includes things like making sure that we have regular one-on-ones, thinking about the development needs of our staff, and giving real-time feedback, both positive and developmental. And that needs to, again, be happening throughout the year, not just at those sort of scheduled check-in times. I think a strong performance culture also needs fair and transparent evaluation. Managers having the confidence and the skills to assess performance honestly, document it appropriately, and either recognise and reward achievement or address gaps in a timely way. Running through all of this, of course, is a foundational capability, which is the ability to comfortably give and receive feedback. That's a skill we should be building at every level, because without it, even the best design systems will fall flat. Ultimately, performance management should feel like a natural part of how we lead, not an isolated event or a form to fill out.
Thank you, Bronwyn. And I noticed you talked a little bit about the manager's confidence in giving that performance or like delivering that feedback. So I guess it's good if we talk about that in my next question talks a little bit more about that, about how frontline managers may struggle, not all, but some do find it difficult giving feedback, especially when performance issues arise. What's your approach to helping such managers build that confidence and skills to have those conversations in an effective manner?
Look, I think obviously there's a range. There's always a range of these things in terms of confidence in giving that feedback. But in my experience, I think it has been something that I see that many managers do struggle with, and they do find it uncomfortable. And like many things that we find uncomfortable, we sometimes often avoid them. And then the challenge, of course, is when we avoid them, small issues can grow into bigger problems. And what we might have been able to deal with a quick conversation to provide some advice, support to people about how they might approach a situation, how to complete a piece of work more effectively, it suddenly is starting to look at a more formal process. It's escalated because we haven't felt comfortable addressing those smaller instances, of development or correction in a timely way. What happens then, obviously, when these conversations become more formal, the stakes within that conversation for both of us get much higher, and the conversation becomes even more difficult. That means that for us as managers, our emotional response might be heightened. something that we might have been able to resolve over a cup of coffee and a quick chat is suddenly a formal improvement plan or even disciplinary action. And I have to say, that's stressful for everyone. Anyone that's been involved in those processes knows how stressful they are, and rarely leads to the best outcome for either the person, the manager, or the organisation. I think avoidance also means that we're not developing the very skills that we need, because like any skill, we need to understand how to do it. We need to understand why we do it, but we also need to practice it. If we're only picking up the tennis ball once a year, we're not going to be in the finals of Wimbledon. So I think it really is, again, coming back to a little bit of a cultural issue. We need to start by normalising feedback, making a natural, regular part of leadership, not just something that happens when something goes wrong. And I think that culture shift has to start with capability building across the board for all of us, the entire organisation, for both giving and receiving feedback. And it needs to be actively role modelled by senior leaders, even when, or especially when, it feels uncomfortable for us. If we're not demonstrating to people why and how we feel that's important, and leaning into that discomfort to do it ourselves, then we can't expect other people in our organisation to be doing that. In our programs, in the training programs that we do, in the work that we do with organisations, we do start by normalising that feedback as a daily leadership habit, not something, reserved for formal reviews or, as I said before, when things go wrong. Feedback shouldn't feel like a high stakes confrontation. It should be, part of the way that we do things within our organisations. So we give managers some practical support, some tools for how to structure conversations using things like the SBI model, situation behaviour impact model, and feedback frameworks that they can practice with. We use our actors to show scenarios, to show scenes, to give us an opportunity to discuss what we're seeing in those scenes, how we can develop those skills. We do focus on looking at both skill and comfort, because both matter. The best way to learn how to have challenging conversations is actually by having them in a safe, supported environment. And some of our programs do also allow people to practice those skills with the actors as well. Confidence can come from preparation, structure, and repetition. And perhaps most importantly, I think we help, see managers see feedback not as a criticism, but as an investment in the people in their teams. If we can shift our mindset from seeing feedback as difficult or courageous, and, I've used those words myself today, but seeing it for what it is, and this is something I genuinely believe, that it's a gift that we give people that we genuinely want to see achieve their goals, develop their skills, and reach their potential.
Thank you, Bronwyn. I'll give you a bit of a break. And thank you also for highlighting how we use actors. That is one of our unique training delivery method, where we have professional actors enacting some really relatable scenarios that could happen in the workplace. This is a great opportunity for our attendees to understand and respond to such situations if they were ever in one in their own workplaces. So before I go on to my next question, I would like to bring two of our actors to put forth the role play, which Bronwyn will unpack after.
Marcus, I need to speak to you. We're going to be having a formal performance meeting this afternoon. HR will be involved.
Wait, what? This is the first time I'm hearing about this. You haven't mentioned my performance has been a problem.
Oh, I mean, I've raised my concerns with you before. The missed deadlines, the slow turnaround times.
What? Well, you may have mentioned things in passing, like I remember you saying, like, try to be quicker next time, but I mean, that didn't sound formal or serious.
Okay, so, well, I mean, maybe I should have been clearer, but HR says we need formal documentation, so I'm now starting the process.
But this is the real first conversation we've had about it. I mean, you haven't given me a plan or goals to improve. I didn't even know you had an issue with how I was performing.
Okay, well, I've been noticing these issues for months. but I've been so busy I wasn't actually able to address it in detail.
So you've known for months that I wasn't meeting expectations, and instead of telling me directly or helping me to fix it, you let it slide only to suddenly bring it up as a formal issue?
Okay, well, I didn't want to come down hard too early. Okay, honestly, I thought you'd pick up on the hints. I mean, surely you knew I wasn't happy, Marcus. Anyway, this is the way forward now.
No, this doesn't seem fair. You've been judging me without giving me a chance to turn things around, and now you've gone to HR and made this into a whole big thing?
Okay, well, it's not really about how you're feeling, Marcus. Okay?
Definitely a lot going on there, Bronwyn. Let's take a moment to unpack that role play. What were your thoughts after watching that?
Look, I think obviously in our role plays, people might look at them and say that they feel that it's a little bit over exaggerated. I'm sure there might be some HR practitioners on the call that will say that that's actually quite a regular situation they deal with. I remember, for those out there that have ever watched the lovely series Utopia, highly recommended, a situation where the Celia Pakula character has a conversation with HR that someone should have understood, that they were upset about the manager being upset about being late for work because they glared at them when they walked in the morning. And I think sometimes, particularly when we might have a little bit of discomfort level with conflict, we do feel like we've given people feedback, but maybe we've done that in a way that isn't necessarily received by the person as clearly as it should be. And again, this is one of the reasons why I talk about feedback being a gift, because we can't expect people to perform at the level that we want them to perform, to correct errors, to work on their skills, if we're not being clear with them around what those expectations are. I think some of the learnings I guess from that scenario that I would take away with is, bringing up issues in a timely fashion. If you have a concern with the way someone's performance is, having that conversation with them early and often. If performance doesn't improve, making sure you go and have that conversation with HR early as to how you might be able to deal with the situation. Be clear with people when something maybe is a little bit of a informal correction versus when something's moving into a more formal process. Making sure that we document those conversations, not just for our own records, but follow up with employees afterwards around just a little quick summary of the conversation and the 3 or 4 dot points that we're both going out of that meeting with a shared understanding of what we need to work on. And then, of course, making sure that if it does proceed to a point where we're making a decision about someone's employment or performance, that we're making sure that that is in writing and that people are given what we would call procedural fairness, which is an opportunity to respond to those situations, an opportunity to improve, and an opportunity to, I guess, give their side of the story.
Thank you, Bronwyn. And to our wonderful actors for putting forth such an incredible performance. It was very relatable, very easy to understand. And also, I'm sure all the attendees got a sense of what they could do in response to a situation like that. Thanks to you, Bronwyn. A quick check-in with all our participants. Let's just see if you're all still here with me. Please also feel free to drop in questions you may have relating to this topic. Once we're done with my set of questions, we'll be going into the audience questions where it's your moment to shine. You can ask any questions you have to our expert here today, and we'll try our best to answer as many as we possibly can. Okay, back to my next question to you, Bronwyn. We saw how important documentation is. But at the same time, we looked at that sort of miscommunication between a manager and this employee. But when we're looking at a team member or an employee not meeting expectations, if this is a situation, and managers may feel caught between, wanting to be supportive, but then there's also the other side to balance these issues effectively, what's your framework to respond and identify underperformance, which is fair and respectful to everyone?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that those two elements are at odds with each other. I think we finished for those of us that did attend the last webinar. There was a question that had come up around how do we maintain accountability while still having a positive relationship with staff. And we ended that webinar saying, friendly doesn't mean fuzzy, that you can be kind and warm and supportive, without being unclear or inconsistent. And part of our job as managers is to hold people accountable. That's why, that's what we do. But to do that in a way that supports and develops our people to be able to meet their KPIs and objectives. Again, at the end of the day, that's all why we're here, right? To make sure that we can do our job in the best way possible. One of the things that we look at in our training programs when we're looking at how can we empower and develop our people to meet their goals is a pretty simple will skill matrix. That it's important as managers that we get to the why of why somebody might not be performing at the level that we expect of them. So, if something's not happening, rather than starting conversations with judgment, approaching situations with curiosity, asking people for their, input into why they might not be performing at the level where they are, and then looking at that to understand what's driving that. So is it a skill issue? If it's a skills gap, then the appropriate response obviously might be something like capability building, buddying the person up with somebody that has more expertise. But if it's a will issue, if it's a lack of motivation, if there's an attitude issue, might be things going on at home for people, then obviously the response is going to be a different response. We might need to focus on greater clarity around our expectations. We might need to talk to the person around, goal setting. But regardless of where someone sits within that matrix, the reason maybe for that issue with their performance, the way that we have that conversation with the person matters. And that's where we tend to use within the programs our GROW model, our GROW coaching model, to guide, structured coaching style conversations, still, performance focused. Using this approach, I think, can help managers avoid jumping straight to conclusions or consequences, and instead approach with curiosity and structure. I think it also helps to sort of put some responsibility back on the employee to engage with their own performance, which is, certainly a big part of accountability. So I guess to answer the question of what's fair, to me, fairness is clarity, consistency, and conversation. Not assuming, not avoiding, not judging, and certainly not waiting until performance has, gone too far to be able to address it effectively.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bronwyn. I guess we talked about fairness and consistency in conversation, but if we also look at how performance reviews are generally viewed, maybe not in all cases, but most cases, it's a minefield for managers. Would you agree? And they do want to be honest and helpful, but they're also worried about the elephant in the room, the legal implications that are involved. So what is your advice to leaders on conducting reviews that are both legally sound, but also genuinely developmental for their teams?
Yeah, look, I think it's pretty common for managers to hesitate, to give feedback, especially when we're at that more formal level of maybe performance reviews, or certainly maybe if it is a performance improvement plan. I think that fear can be of, saying the wrong thing, of upsetting someone, of appearing or not wanting to come across as unkind, and of course of legal risk, being potentially fearful of giving that feedback because they feel it might lead to someone submitting an unfair work claim, for example, or being accused of bullying. But under the Fair Work Act, it's important to remember that it's not unlawful to give feedback. In fact, reasonable management action carried out in a reasonable way is explicitly protected. And that includes when that feedback might be difficult to hear. So I think the key question to ask ourselves when we are in that situation of a formal performance review or just even giving feedback to people is not can I say that, but am I saying this in a fair, respectful and proportionate way? That concept of proportionality, we certainly talk about that in our programs with managers when we look at bullying and discrimination, harassment matters. That concept of proportionality, the tone, content and consequence of your feedback should match the nature and seriousness of the issue. You know, if someone misses a deadline once, is late for work once, that doesn't call for a formal warning, right? That calls for a conversation. But on the other hand, if there's been a pattern of underperformance despite, you know, clear feedback, setting those expectations, providing support to the person, then formal steps might be appropriate. And if we delay having those formal steps, then that can set that, again, that's almost sets a tone in the other way that we're not dealing with the situation. I've certainly dealt with performance situations in my time where people have, you know, felt probably aggrieved, mostly aggrieved about the fact that no one has, you know, told them in the past that their performance hasn't been meeting expectations. And so, you know, if people haven't been told that they're not performing, it can come as a bit of a shock suddenly if we're having formal conversations with them or there's consequences for them. I guess for me to meet that threshold of what's reasonable management action, you know, it's about setting those clear expectations, giving timely and constructive feedback, documenting those performance issues appropriately. And as I said before, that includes that clarity between yourself and the employee throughout the process of what you've discussed, what you've agreed. And if we are at that formal end of dealing with the situation, as I said before, making sure that we allow employees opportunities to respond and improve. And you know, that's obviously not an overnight process. We need to also be proportionate about the time that we allow people to do that. So if all of those elements are in place, the process is free from hostility, humiliation, providing that in a way that, you know, maybe is leaning in from our emotional response, then the feedback and review process is not only lawful, but it's also necessary. So from a leadership perspective, from our role as managers, that means making sure we prepare for those reviews with specific factual examples, linking the feedback that we're giving people to the agreed goals or role expectations that we have with them. As I said before, approach your conversation with curiosity. Don't go in already having made up your mind about why you think the person is behaving in that way. Create a genuine space for two-way dialogue. Develop solutions in partnership with the person, you know, whether that's looking at those development opportunities, capability development, clearer KPIs, whatever it is, you know, work with the person as to what might be the best solution. And then, as I've said, always follow up with email summarizing the conversation, agreed next steps that you've both committed to. At the end of the day, a good performance review should really just feel like a summary of the conversations that you've already been having throughout the year. It certainly shouldn't be the first time someone's hearing something important. From a legal perspective, from a legal perspective, it's actually the absence of that documented, reasonable conversations, that reasonable feedback that's probably more problematic than having them.
Wonderful, Bronwyn. Thank you so much for your detailed response. That's all the questions I have for you today, but you're not done yet. I'm not going to let you off the hook so easy. We've got the audience questions now. I can see some great questions in the Q&A box, but before that, we did have a really interesting question that came through our registration form. So I would like to start off with that question first. So are you ready, Bronwyn?
Yep, absolutely.
Wonderful. So the first question one of our attendees had asked through the form was, what do you do if you start a performance improvement plan and the employee is adamant that they are performing and they refuse to comply?
Yeah, look, obviously this is something that has the potential to come up, and it's not unusual for performance conversations, and particularly where it's linked to a formal process, a performance improvement plan, to feel, tense and emotionally charged. When we look at our program on professional and courageous conversations, we talk about why are some conversations more difficult than others. We talk about high stakes conversations. And high stakes conversations are where things like crucial conversations are where there's high stakes, where emotions run high, and that there may be differing opinions of what's happening. Again, that doesn't mean we avoid the conversation. It just means we need to prepare well for it. I think first it's important to acknowledge the disagreement rather than just try and push through it, right? We're just not trying to win the conversation, right? People aren't always going to see things the same way. So we need to make sure we're trying to, I guess, create, as I said before, that space, those conditions for honest reflection and dialogue. So approach with curiosity, a genuine desire to understand why somebody isn't meeting those expectations. Providing the person with those specific examples of where their performance isn't meeting expectations. So not just vague comments around their performance or attendance or behavior, those sorts of things, but using that SBI model, that specific examples, to ground that conversation in specific observable examples, rather than feelings or generalizations. Describe the situation, what you observed, the impact that it has on the team, on the customer, on the goals, on the person themselves. And so that can sort of help make it clearer around when expectations aren't being met, and maybe moving the discussion away from opinions. I think this, no, I think this, and more towards facts. I guess linking that feedback again back to those expectations, policies, if we're talking about conduct issues, might be role descriptions, KPIs, codes of conduct. Again, that can help remove some of that ambiguity, frame the discussion around those shared standards rather than personal judgment. I spoke before about employees taking some, I guess, accountability or ownership of their own performance. And so that assisting that employee to reflect, you might ask, what certainly approach with that, seeking their view on the situation first, asking them their perspective on the feedback, what support they might need to meet expectations more consistently, asking for their view of how their performance is tracking against policies and goals. As I said before, we shouldn't be trying to win the conversation, right? We're trying to create shared understanding that the person can engage with. Now, if the person continues to resist or refuses to engage with the process or the plan, of course, you need to escalate according to your organisation's performance management policy. But starting from that place of transparency, specificity, and open reflection, I think gives us that best chance of turning a conversation from maybe an adversarial, difficult one into a more constructive one.
Great answer, Bronwyn. Thank you. I'll move on to this question that we got from Michelle, one of the attendees in our webinar today. So they've written a long message about how they're the clinical services manager and lead a fully remote telehealth nursing team across Australia. And they have clear protocols in place and provide formal written feedback on workloads. However, considering the challenges involved, because it is a dispersed team, they're asking for specific tips or tricks for fostering engagement and building trust and managing performance besides the process they already have in place. Do you have any feedback for Michelle?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Michelle. Great question. I actually used to work, I've worked both in health and I actually used to work in disability, and a lot of our, back in the day when disability was government service. We had our home care workers who very rarely came into an organisation at all. Their job every day was to get in their car and go to the client's house, provide services, and, you know, maybe they would have a team meeting together once a quarter. So, you know, obviously in health, you know, as Michelle mentions there, we often have people working across a variety of organisations. So I'm going to approach this response from two ways. If we look at that sort of dispersed workforce where people are working and maybe not having a lot of connection either to their own team or to their manager and the team, I think as managers, us stepping in to create those opportunities for building that trust and engagement is even more critical, because we want to try and build that connection to either to, you know, to the workforce, to the team, to that relationship with ourselves. So when we talk about this feedback, one-on-ones, regular check-ins, of course, it doesn't have to be face-to-face. It can be over Zoom, you know, or Teams. We have wonderful technology now post-COVID to be able to do that. Often there's challenges with shift work to be able to do that, but making sure we allocate that time if we have, you know, times where we can cross over to have that quick conversation, that quick check-in with our employees. More than those formal processes, I think those opportunities to build that relationship in an informal way with our people is critically important. If we build that relationship with people and we create that space for them to come with us and share with us, then they're more likely to raise concerns and issues with them again in a timely fashion so that we can try and resolve them before they become bigger issues. I think the other thing that I would say is if we look at what happened during COVID, particularly for those in corporate spaces, we had to very quickly move to a remote way of working because everybody was at home. Everybody was not together in the workplace. And I think at that start of that process, we all got very good at adapting to that by doing things like daily check-ins. Very quick, doesn't have to be a long period of time, but just that daily 15-minute start to the day to check in about how people are going, to set those objectives for the day. We did do social things over Zoom. I know some people found that maybe a little bit forced or cheesy. But, you know, I think that there's ways that we can do some of that socialization and engagement with each other online. And I think we got good at doing that through COVID. And then we've sort of lost the practice of doing that, moving back into sort of people being back in the office, some people being hybrid. So I think, again, create that deliberate time and space in people's calendars for some of that engagement, for some of that check-in is really important.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bronwyn. And I hope that answered your question, Michelle. Moving on to the next question here, Bronwyn, I've jumped a few questions actually because one of the attendees is talking about misconduct and performance issues. And as someone who runs our Custodians of Culture, which focuses on managing misconduct in the workplace and managing everyday performance training, I thought this would be a great question that you could respond to. How do we distinguish between misconduct or performance issues when the lines get a bit blurry?
Yeah, look, I guess in terms of an outcome, there might not be an outcome, a difference in outcome. You know, if somebody's behaving in a way that's inconsistent with the organisational policies and procedures, then that's just as much as a performance issue as somebody not meeting their objectives and KPIs. But I guess maybe where the person's coming from here is you know, when is something seen as, I guess, serious misconduct versus maybe breach of policy versus behaviour. I think just trying to think about what the person might be getting to here.
Yeah, very interesting question.
I think that the question might be around where is the line between just dealing with something through our informal processes versus when it might escalate to something that is much more serious. One of the things that we look at when we do look at, I guess, what would be maybe termed misconduct in terms of our discrimination, harassment and bullying is we look at and share with our managers a five option way of resolving some of those situations. And really that breadth goes from things like people having a self-managed conversation or a bystander having a conversation with someone informally, a manager, HR, informally trying to manage or resolve a situation versus dealing with it as a formal process where there is an actual investigation and potentially a consequence of termination or disciplinary action, or even up to external when we might be talking about things like Fair Work Australia, police, Australian Human Rights Commission, those sorts of ways of resolving. And so I guess for me, the line when something becomes informal versus formal is maybe really the question here, is if there's significant risk to people within the organisation, if that behaviour is creating an unsafe work environment for people, if performance if there is a significant breach of organisational policy, expectations, code of conduct. Certainly if we have given feedback, given people an opportunity to respond and their behaviour doesn't improve or that misconduct continues, then it would move from trying to deal with that in an informal way to a more formal way. And certainly those more serious elements of misconduct might need to be dealt with formally straight away. So certainly if someone was putting other employees at risk through bullying, harassing behaviour, then that would need to be dealt with, straight away. Obviously, then there are things like serious misconduct. If we're talking about things that are seen to what they would call sever the employment relationship, theft, assault, those sorts of things. Obviously, that's dealt with, not through an informal way, but that would be dealt with directly and certainly different level of response than some of those more sorts of informal performance issues.
Great, thank you, Bronwyn. I think they got back with an example saying, for example, breach of a policy or values where there's no allegation or investigation. And I think they're asking more about should it be treated as misconduct or performance management. I think that's pretty much like what you had answered in your response. So thank you for that question. Just one, maybe we'll do one final question, Bronwyn, and then we can wrap up if that's okay. I see quite a few of our attendees talking about underperformance, and we did cover it to a great detail in one of our questions earlier. But one interesting thing that I noticed here is one of the attendees is asking, what if, we've raised concerns through regular catch-ups and given them feedback, to-do lists, etc., and then it's termed as micromanaging. So what's the best way to address this as a leader?
I think there's two sides of this, I guess, looking at this is, one, we do need to have to be aware of our own leadership styles and how that works for different people. There are some people that will need a lot of detail when we give them objectives, KPIs. They will maybe, and there might be valid reasons for that. New employees certainly might need a lot more support than somebody that's been with the organisation for a long time. So we do need to be conscious of our own leadership style and how that's working for people. I myself don't work particularly well if I have someone checking in on me regularly. And so I do prefer a more sort of hands-off style of leadership. But in this situation, if we have, set that framework for regular feedbacks, given, clarity around that, clarity around our objectives, giving people an opportunity to respond and improve, and then they're saying that we're micromanaging. I guess the reality is we can't stop people from making claims against us. As I said before, if we can show that we're approaching conversations with curiosity, that we're being objective in the feedback that we're giving people, and that would be by using our sort of SBI techniques. If we give people an opportunity to respond, we can show that it's proportionate. We're not asking people to do something that's unreasonable. We're not giving them unreasonable deadlines, all of those sorts of things. Then really our position is defendable. If we've kept that record, we've followed up with people after our meetings with our, 3 or 4 dot points about what we've agreed to, then I think we're in a good position. We can't stop people, feeling aggrieved. There are processes that we have in place for people to be able to escalate issues. They're in place for good reasons. If we've done the right thing and we can defend ourselves, hopefully, that organisation will be able to see that it has been done in a reasonable and proportionate way and is reasonable management action, is not, bullying, which, micromanaging potentially is perceived as.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bronwyn, and thank you. Sorry. Yeah, go on.
Sorry. I just noticed there's a couple of questions talking about what happens if we're trying to give performance feedback to people and they haven't been pulled up before, or people haven't been. There's sort of a number of questions there, and I just think that's just quickly to address, because I think that's a pretty common situation for people. I've certainly been in this situation before where we have been in the process of a performance management process and somebody is at the point of being a show cause letter, and then it sort of says, well, no one's ever told me before that my performance isn't meeting expectations. And I think unfairly, this is a pretty common situation in Australia. I think we have quite a bit of a level of conflict avoidance in our management styles in some of our systems. Those of us that have worked in the public sector will know that there is somewhat of a reluctance to escalate to a final point some of those performance issues. I think we just have to be clear about line in the sand. I think we need to acknowledge that people might not have received that feedback in that past. Maybe that poor performance hasn't been dealt with in the past, but then we're drawing a line in the sand and moving forward. So we're setting those expectations from now forward. We're giving people the skills or the development or the opportunity to meet that expectation, and we're going to assess that performance going forward. I think, again, it shouldn't be a reason that we stop trying to get that level of performance achieved or don't address the situation. I acknowledge that it can be really difficult, but I think just acknowledge for the individual that might well be the case, but we're setting those expectations and moving forward in helping somebody to meet those expectations. And if they're not able to meet those expectations, then it can be, and this is going, I know that this will sound difficult for some people, sometimes the best resolution is for both people to be moving on from that relationship. So whether that's that employee going through that final process and being terminated from the organisation, or choosing to move on through resignation or other means.
Thank you, Bronwyn. And before I wrap up this section and tell everyone about our next webinar date and topic, would you like to give attendees something to think about, or like a takeaway as they're walking away from today's session?
Yeah, I know I sort of harp on this a bit, and I always say when I do my training session that I know this sounds like it should be up on if anyone remembers those posters from the 90s, sort of the scene of the people rowing together in the fading sunset. This sounds quite cheesy. I am actually quite outcomes focused myself as a leader. I do, as I've said, work with organisations around trying to create high performance. But I do honestly believe that feedback is a gift. I think that if we care about people in our team, if we want our teams to achieve the best that they can, we really do need to shift how we see feedback, so that we don't see it as difficult, challenging, something that we only do when people have done something wrong, because again, feedback is a positive thing as well. We should be giving feedback when people are performing well and doing the right thing. And so if we can shift the way that we look at feedback, if we can actively work, again, because it doesn't just happen by itself, if we can actively work on our own comfort level with the giving and receiving of feedback, if we can help our team, it doesn't have to be from manager to employee, it can be within the team as well. If we can work along on our culture of giving and receiving feedback, I think that can go a huge way to starting to create a more performance-focused environment.
Great. Wonderful, Bronwyn. Thank you so much. And thank you to all our attendees for joining our session today. I would like to just take a moment to talk about our next webinar in this series, titled Leadership Accountability in Wage Compliance, Pay, Rostering, and Modern Awards, which will take place on the 2nd of September. I'm just about to drop the form details in the chat. So please feel free to submit your details through this form, and we'll get in touch with you with the next steps to join this webinar. But once again, thank you so much, Bronwyn, for joining us today. And to one of the attendees who complimented our role play, thank you so much. That's what makes our training and all our interactive sessions super engaging. Thank you to our technical support in the background for helping us with the slide deck, and to all the attendees for joining us today. I hope you have a lovely week ahead. Thanks, Bronwyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Manasa. Thank you, everybody.